I used to have a very stereotyped idea of what a friend was, really. And I think that's expanded now to the point where I don't really know if I can give an answer to the question. My own experience is that I get on with all sorts of people in all sorts of different kinds of ways.
In some ways, well, kind of the same.
It's just weird, like at different aspects of like one personality in a kind of way. It's really weird.
Yeah,
isn't it?
strange.
If Max or I, if either of us to die,
We were talking
it would just
about
be.
this the other day,
We talked about this the other day. It would be so
would be weird.
Weird.
You're much less likely in the modern day to see friendships that last a lifetime. Partly because circumstances are against it, but those circumstances also are against the development of a really serious attitude to life as containing high values which need to be worked at.
I mean, Australia. I think they probably would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the best way to get to know someone is to spend time with them.
I was a lot younger then, yeah.
Even though Alia, Sam's dad, and Aloka, Max's dad, have a Buddhist connection going back 20 years, more recent changes in circumstances mean they can spend lots more time together. The results are several paintings and a closer friendship. When I was growing up in the East End of London in the late 40s, the effects of the war were still around. The deep social bonds and friendships necessary for survival were an ordinary part of daily life.
I think human beings are innately social. From the very beginning of life, we're in contact with other human beings. We're in contact with their mother and father, siblings, family. It's very difficult, if not impossible, for us to grow as human beings without contact with other human beings. Whether when we're infants and quite helpless, or whether when we're a bit older and need to acquire education and culture, we're very dependent on input from other people. It's very difficult to get very far on your own.
My dad would take us fishing and things like that, take us on long walks across fields and things. He'd sort of take us out at the weekend for a walk up to the library or something, and we'd meet other men on the street, and it was obvious that he was friends with them. He was pleased to see them, they were pleased to see him, and they'd stop and sort of spend the time of day together.
Our fathers used to meet down the pub. There was a sort of extended thing. There was a sort of inner circle of people that I used to hang out with. And there was three or four of those. Yeah, and they were just good friends, and we just used to do lots of stuff together. I started going around their house, and their parents sort of adopt me in a way. I remember one of my mates' mum saying, "Well, you're part of the family now. You can come any time you like." So it's really nice.
My dad would, I suppose, in a certain sort of sense, befriend my friends. He'd ask them about themselves and what they were interested in, where they came from, and things like that.
We've always been there, haven't we? Really?
Yeah.
It's like because our parents living in the same house.
Were they?
Yeah, when we were first born. In the 80s, we just did certain kinds of stuff like mud fights and things, he said.
Yeah.
But then when it got to the 90s, it was like running around with like BB guns and stuff in the middle of the countryside.
Shooting people.
We used to go out and climb trees, light fires, and sit round the fires baking potatoes out of the larder. But generally it was just building dams in the stream and pond dipping we did a great deal of. Making dens, the usual thing I suppose that children did.
I used to really love the Cubs. I love the thing about the Jungle Book and all that.
You know, sort of doing good kind of thing, be prepared, all that kind of stuff. You know, there was a sort of shared ethos. I also got involved in a cycling club, which was pretty much an all-male environment. So I've always tended to feel at home in large groups of men.
The pure, simple joy of a cattle drive. All that sky, all that land stretching out towards all horizons. There's no sense of freedom that ever sets a man so high. Makes him feel, yeah, this is what I was born to do.
Get a bunch of men going off into the wilderness together and just sharing their lives, basically, up against the elements, learning how to survive with each other, sort of on the edge, as it were. And that always very much appealed to me.
We don't want any domestics now, right?
Good luck, lads, and have a good day.
Yeah.
Right?
Where's the milk?
Cheers.
Jay, do you want to sit down?
Oh, no, it's there.
I will sit down. I must be about 4, and my granddad, and my sister Pauline, and Granny there.
The family wasn't really a happy one. The most significant memories, I suppose, in my early childhood was of going to the long meadows and just lie in the long grass and gaze into the blue vault of heaven. And there were times when suddenly I would experience a state of deep joy and bliss and oneness. And when I came out of them, as I inevitably did, I just felt a sense of loss. I felt that it was quite a burden for me to have to go home.
Yeah. Ben.
Do you remember Jason?
You do. We used to come up here, not very often.
But Jason was up here before that, before you ever moved out together.
We used to have cheese sandwiches till very late at night out there.
That's exactly. That's true.
Cheese sandwiches.
Football was a big part of their life. Play Sunday, watch it Saturday.
Oh, he's done really well though, and it's a good cross! Pahal scores!
We always just come on this green here and just pick up sides and just play until dinner was ready, basically. And I did a paper round, and that's where I met John Wilkie, who's still a friend of mine now. You know, we eventually played football, went to work, used to drink together, go on holidays together.
I can't face all this. This is too emotional.
Emotions are really don't often collide in the same sentence. Note the drop shoulder, Trev.
There was one particular tree I used to climb, and I would get right to the top and then sort of sing made-up songs into the wind. And in my mind, I imagined a beautiful girl in another land, and then if I sort of paused for a while, it seemed that she would sing them back to me, and I felt that there was some other person who felt the same as I did.
There was the whole business of blood brothers that I was quite interested in, or that definitely sort of took my fancy as a young boy. The idea of being in a close relationship with somebody from another society or a different society, that kind of thing.
Death to the oppressor. The resistance.
I went to a boarding school, and I spent the term times in the boarding house there. And well, for to begin with, everything went pretty well, and I had friends there, much as I'd had in my life up until then.
Come on up, Bobby. We want to stroke you. You too. Get upstairs and behave yourselves.
A prefect took an obvious interest in me and he was concerned to help me on my way, and that was very, very helpful to me. Just that he was expressed a certain amount of confidence and interest in me gave me a lot of confidence and helped me through a very difficult period in my school life. I found myself out of the group, and I'm still to this day not really clear why. Perhaps I was a little late in developing physically, so with the cruelty of adolescent boys, they picked on me. I think popularity and unpopularity have often very little to do with one's own real qualities. They're not necessarily to do with one's individuality or one's moral worth, anything like that. It can be quite adventitious factors that make you generally popular or generally unpopular. And I've often felt it's extremely unfair in that respect, although I've never suffered, apart from that very brief period, from widespread unpopularity. But I know people who are, to my mind, extremely good and worthy people, and who proved to me to be some of my best friends, who just seem to be unpopular. They somehow or other attract other people's dislike.
I was hanging out with gangs of 20 blokes who were sniffing glue and robbing cars.
Sure. If you didn't rob cars, and if you didn't do the kind of thing the kids were doing at that time, you were kind of ostracised.
Gary White ended up, he's a very good car thief and a very good driver.
Lived on my road.
Yeah, and he ended up as a drugs runner, and he ended up going to prison with that or something like that.
I don't know anybody from my school who's in prison or who's dead.
Yeah.
Most of them have gone away and have careers and all of that.
Yeah, yeah. Here's the school that I went to school in.
I went to England and won. I went to Spain and won. And there's the Canadians from London.
Yeah.
In the 70s, things were very, very violent in Northern Ireland, particularly Belfast, Newry, and where I lived in Tyrone as well, particularly South Tyrone. And when I was about 10, I came home one day and the place was swarming with army choppers. There was a bomb. The army came in one night and just arrested in my local town 150 guys. I remember listening to a gun battle just right outside my house. And this was in the middle of the countryside. It's funny, a kid's response to violence. All of us were just curious, actually, and maybe even a little bit excited. Even in that gun battle that I was in, I was interested. I wasn't scared, actually.
Well, then war broke out. I remember on one occasion looking out of my bedroom window, and suddenly they picked up a German plane. I found myself just crying because I realized that, in that plane was somebody's father, and they wouldn't see him again. And he was just spiraling down, totally out of control, with only a few moments left of his life. And it seemed to me that the world had gone crazy. I suppose children need, to feel that there is somebody who they can turn to. And obviously it's generally an adult, but all the adults were busy killing each other. I used to write poems. I found that helped. When I first went to the grammar school, I met a soulmate. He was the English teacher, and he was also the music teacher. And he introduced me to the romantic poets, Byron, Keats, Shelley. And he also introduced me to classical music. And I just fell in love with him, totally.
I had a couple of friends who were like surrogate grandfather and grandmother to me, and they owned a farm. And through the farmyard connection, I met a guy called John Devlin when I was about 8 or 9. John and I developed a friendship with each other. His family were quite cultured, I think, relatively speaking. We used to go for long cycles, usually to go fishing, all very innocent. My first contact with a Protestant was via John, actually. I used to think that Protestants were like another species.
I can remember sitting in your parents' house and we'd stay up really late at night. Well, we would have been 18, 19.
Yeah.
And we'd just met and we'd sit around and we'd be talking about the meaning of words.
Yeah.
What does where mean? What does is mean?
Yeah.
What does what mean? I think out of that we started just questioning things, and I remember really strongly thinking at that time, what's the point?
Would you agree with Jason's general description of the ordinary people and the people who walk in sticks? Who
Livers, people who live, their sole purpose in life is just to live and die. They're not in touch with the finer things, even though I'm not yet in touch with the finer things, but I will be. I'm floating along now. Floating along the river of life. I'm not going anywhere in particular.
Just shooting the breeze.
Something's going to happen to me. Yeah, something is going to happen to me someday. I don't know, waiting for some sort of religious event or something.
A kick in the ball.
Spiritual. I won't say religious. I'll say spiritual. I'll say spiritual because something is going to happen to me, and I know it's going to happen to me, and it's going to change me, and it's going to make me what I really want to be.
I suppose I got bored talking about, bicycle wheels and tyres with the guys I was going cycling with. I wanted to talk about broader issues, and very often they weren't prepared to do that. Part of the glue was the fact that you were interested in bicycles, and you couldn't move outside of that. There was one guy in the cycling club who I can remember we had this conversation one day about the fact that we both felt like we were slightly outside of things. We both grew up in Ilford, sort of thing, more or less working class, East End. And, I used to go around and visit his family kind of thing. We got on well together. I got on well with them. They liked me and my parents liked him kind of thing. So it was a sort of natural sort of affinity in a certain kind of way.
We all had an affinity because we were all taking the same drugs in the same kind of quantities.
Yeah.
Drinking in the same pub.
Yeah.
Grogan's.
Yeah.
None of us had any money. We did with a bit of money.
But we kind of liked it that way.
I have an obsession with weapons. I did, but that was a couple of years ago. See? And now I have an obsession with guitars.
Unhealthy. They don't breathe, Sam, and they don't move. They're not women. Women are good.
Yeah, you don't have a woman, Max. Deal with it.
No, but I'm pleased about that at the moment.
I suppose so. Well, can't I just be pleased about it? Because I'm not, but I could just pretend that I am.
No. I can be pleased because I know how much hassle they are.
Yeah, and I can be pleased because I know
you don't want to know how much hassle they are. Women do come and go.
Yeah.
And they tend to do a lot more going than they do coming. That wasn't supposed to sound that bad. That really was sort of supposed to sound that.
There was about 7 or 8 of us who used just to go and do things all the time. Like Sundays we go out to the coast and drink and mess around. We go on holidays together, go to football together. We do all those sort of things. And that stayed together for quite a time. And I think it was only when the guy who was my best mate then, Dave Russell, got his girlfriend pregnant that it started falling apart. And even people who were with girlfriends, and actually some of them married and still married to them, there was still lots of time to do what we were doing. And somehow, Steve Terrell was quite clear with his wife, he said, I like my beer, I like my football, my friends, and that's not going to change. Although she tried to change him for about 10 years.
There was this thing in the cycling club that, every now and again a woman would come along with her bicycle and she'd ride along with us for a few weeks, and then one of the guys would disappear with her. So it was this thing about taking one of the blood brothers away, I suppose. There was this sort of sense of, I suppose if you're a healthy young woman and you're looking for a man, you'd go into a man's environment and find one, and then you'd take him out and sort of domesticate him.
What are you guys doing? We're building a clubhouse. Clubhouse? That's the lamest thing I've ever heard. It's not lame, it's sweet. After we build this clubhouse, we're gonna get girls to play Truth or Dare. Why? Because, dumbass, we can dare them to do gross stuff and make them cry. What, were you born yesterday?
Yeah, we used to climb so many of these trees. We used to just hide up in them and just like.
I would say it's 2021 when it started, dispersing a bit. Because you get into careers, work becomes more important. You have to think about the future. Well, we're supposed to think about the future and what we're going to do. Although I resolutely realise that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted something else.
Adults are wrong. Wrong.
That's Des. That's Trevor. The handsome chap is me. I suppose looking back, it's probably the best 20 years. It's something you look back on, and I say to my sons now, if you could look back on your footballing career and say you had fun, then that's what it's all about.
John, I see every Monday anyway. We, our women go line dancing, so we go and play darts. John Wilkie, I've seen once or twice in 10 years. Trevor I met for the first time in 10 years at his 50th party, and then he came and joined us once or twice on the Monday night evenings.
John went into the room, we hadn't seen each other for some of us, right, best part of 20 years, 15, 20 years. We walked in the room, it's as if nothing had happened.
So basically, we don't see one another as much as we used to, but we've never lost touch really.
I did feel quite a sense of loss, I think, at that time, because we did drift apart for quite a time. We used to cross and meet, but there was a time when it felt quite magical, for about 5 years, when we just used to do everything together. And it was just, everything was an adventure, and fun. And it was, when I think about it, I feel quite tearful.
It definitely sort of left a gap in my life, I think. I suppose I felt sad about it, really, yeah. I mean, obviously his family was taking up more time. And I did go around and visit him a couple of times, but I found the whole business, quite unpleasant because things obviously hadn't worked out with his family the way he would have liked them to. Obviously his wife had sort of changed after they were married, and he obviously wasn't, as happy as he was before.
In the summer of '75, John's parents were murdered. They were gunned down one night, and also his sister was in the car, and she was wounded. She survived, and that was a terrible shock. I had no idea how to respond to it. John and I used to go to this disco, and I was there with some other friends one night, and John was there. He was only 15, but he was drinking really heavily. He became an alcoholic, actually. I remember late at night after the disco had ended, being in the car park, and I saw John lying on the ground, fully clothed, drunk, sobbing his eyes out. It had only been a few weeks before that his parents had died. And I remember walking past him and ignoring him. And immediately that I did that, I walked past him and ignoring him. I intuitively knew that was a really wrong thing that I did. I should have just responded to him, but I didn't. I just got in the car and just drove off. But it was a very, very impactful experience for me. I instinctively knew that I'd failed John as a friend. And well, that memory is still with me, basically. So somehow I failed as a friend, and I decided after that wouldn't happen again. That no matter what, I would stick by my friends.
In childhood, I certainly looked up to my father. I had a very positive relationship with my father all the way through my childhood and until I left England for India. But in the case of my spiritual teachers, I looked up to them in a different sort of way. I saw them as embodying the spiritual ideal, that is to say, the ideal of enlightenment, at least embodying it to an extent. Embodying, that is to say, the ideal to which I myself was aspiring.
As a youngster, Sangharakshita's spiritual interest was aroused by books like Isis Unveiled. And after leaving the army in India, he made contact with Buddhist and Hindu teachers. He got ordained and subsequently founded a Buddhist movement. In the 90s, Kieran and Jason were out looking for something more enduring than family life or working career.
Now, your mother found the place for us in the newspaper. Sure. Hey,
Goodness.
horses. The Lone Ranger. That was John Clark's room. The little one, yeah. That was mine. Yours? Yeah. I was downstairs. You were. Mark was at the back. Yeah.
I remember moving in clearly, and just a sense of relief.
Yeah, it was summer.
Yeah, just a sense. Oh yeah, it's going to be a good summer. Do you remember that?
We kept saying this one's going to be a good summer.
It's going to be a good summer. This summer's going to be a good summer.
And I can remember we got into this thing of you have a joint and an orange.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
And we'd pour water over one another.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
That was really great.
The four of us were actually close for a period.
Yeah.
A fairly extended period, a couple of months.
Yeah.
Definitely. There was harmony.
Yeah. And we did look after one another.
I was an apprentice in a workshop with about 50 men of all ages from 16 to 65. Some of them definitely liked to talk to me and sort of took me under their wing a little bit. And that's where I met the man I sort of consider to be my first mentor, I suppose, which was it was this strange little man who was interested in Scientology and well, anything and everything. All the other guys used to have the Daily Mirror and Titbits on their bench, and he had the Bible and astrology and science fiction and Worlds in Collision by Velikovsky and things like that.
There was definitely something going on next door.
I can remember we all felt there was some sort of evil or some sort of spirit, and it lived up above through the wall from your room. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember very well. It was haunted. That was my experience of it.
Yeah.
There was at least 2 ghosts in there. The woman didn't know that she was dead, and she was fairly vicious and fairly confused and fairly antagonistic. And I remember we went in there and I was, in my amateur way, trying to exorcise the place.
We found a notebook dated in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And in that was like a diary, and it was talking about Mrs. Murphy next door.
Yeah.
Said such and such.
Her
and somebody
husband
was found dead in Bray, facing 23 degrees north or something like that.
That's right. Yeah.
And that was like, whoa, we found that really weird.
Yeah. My last experience of that whole area was of getting attacked by one of those ghosts one night through the wall.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Through my then girlfriend, I learnt about this summer school in Kent. It was just an academic study of Buddhism, basically, and there were about 8 of us, 8 students, and one of them was Alex Kennedy, who I subsequently realised was Subhuti. And he seemed to me to know what he wanted and where he was going and how to go about getting it. And I suppose quite within days of meeting him, I thought, whatever this man's into, I want. He's onto something, and I want it too. At the end of the course, it led to Archway and 5 Balmore Street and the Pundarika Centre.
We were all bonded significantly because we had a keen curiosity and interest in other. There was also this experience of being brothers in adventure, in that we were going to take the next step psychically, so on, and have bigger experiences, and deeper experiences, and more colourful visions.
Yeah.
Way back when I was at school, I can remember writing this piece. I think I called it Invocation. I can't quite remember now. You've got this kind of monastery, and you've got these purple-robed monks, and the monks recite this invocation. I think I can remember how it begins, and this is terribly embarrassing, but it begins with something like, I know and believe in the infinite truth, and then it goes through all these clauses. What is interesting about that is, you know, at a young age there's a kind of yearning for some kind of contact with reality, something higher, something mystical. But it's interesting it happens in that collective context. There was a kind of sense of a spiritual brotherhood.
Hello, Dave. Your babysitting? Yeah. Why do you have a camera?
Hi, Hamish.
Oh, Hamish.
Over there on the
Okay, I'll
cloud.
keep an eye on.
Sometimes people complain that they're lonely, that they don't have friends. But sometimes it's as though they expect the friends to come to them. They expect other people to take the initiative. But if one wants to have friends, well, one must be a friend. And if one takes a liking to someone, well, just let them know that you'd like to see a bit more of them. Arrange to meet them, have coffee together, have a meal together, go to a film together. I think nobody really needs to be lonely. Because if they're bedridden, if they're blind or deaf or dumb, well, one can understand them feeling lonely and not having much contact. But if they're normal, reasonably healthy human beings, there's no reason why they should be lonely. There are always ways of meeting people and getting to know them, and in that way becoming friends.
Until about 15 years ago, I thought friends were those people that one met at a sports club or academic meeting, or maybe one worked with. It never occurred to me that there may be people to whom I could open my heart. That sort of friendship had not been part of my experience, not until I began to practice Buddhism with Buddhists. I'd like to tell you about Brian because Brian was a very important person in my life. It's only about 4 years since I first met him. His son is a member of the order, close friend of mine. Brought Brian to a Buddhist festival. I don't know quite why, except that Brian was depressed. When I first met him, he just seemed crushed. And I felt some empathy because he'd lived an active life with lots of people about, run his own business. Now he was long since retired. The prospect ahead was sharing the rest of his life with a wife with whom he didn't communicate deeply. It wasn't very long before I found we had a few things in common. Brian enjoyed walking, so I suggested perhaps we might take a walk together, which we did. Brian was very quick to tell me he wasn't a Buddhist and didn't have any real idea about spiritual things, and wasn't I wasting my time? Well, no, I wasn't, because he had a very deep love for the forest, and he knew lots of places that I hadn't met. So we developed a habit of going walking together perhaps once a fortnight. We would meet, walk 2, 3, 4 hours and find some little cafe on the way home. As time went by, something rather more important seemed to develop. I found to my surprise that I was looking forward not only to being out in the bush, but to being with Brian. There was something about him that I found deeply attractive, something important. I wondered what life would be like without Brian, and it definitely would have been much poorer. Then, a few months ago, it all changed. I was on a meditation retreat, at breakfast on the first morning of the retreat, when the phone rang. And to my surprise, it was my friend wanting to speak with me. And then I heard his voice rather uncertainly saying, I thought you'd like to know. Dad died yesterday. Oh no, I said. Not Brian. But yes, it was Brian. He'd been swimming his lengths in the local swimming pool when his poor old tired heart stopped. I put the phone down. I needed to be alone. I walked out and I wept. I wept deeply for my friend. But no, it wasn't for Brian, really. Brian was okay. That was the way he wanted to die. I was weeping for me. He'd been a friend, a very deep friend, and it was only now I began to realize how much I loved him. And he'd gone away and left me without so much as a by your leave or farewell. Well, fair enough, old friend, it's the way you wanted it. And I guess I'll get along without you. It's not going to be all that easy, though, because I'm getting on in life a bit, and finding another friend like you is not very likely. I rang my friend Brian's son back that evening, and he said, I've talked with the family, and we'd like you to conduct the funeral. I said to him, hey, hang on a minute, I've never conducted a funeral for a personal friend before, and it wouldn't be easy, and I don't think I'd keep my dignity very well. He said, don't worry about that, we won't either. I conducted the funeral, a very important occasion for me, and for many other people. There were many people there, Brian's friends from so many different parts of his life. Now, in my diary for the following day was a note which said, meet Brian, 9:15. We were going walking together. And I thought, I'll go anyway. So I walked deep, deep into the forest to where I knew there were some of the best, most beautiful, most noble kauri trees. I stood there under those trees, absolutely lost in their majesty, with a sense of deep worship for such noble beings. I could almost see, I was very aware of Brian beside me, like me, lost in admiration of magnificent trees. I turned very quietly so as not to disturb him, and I walked back the way I'd come.
We also used to play psychic games in here, did we not? Or at least we thought we did. Because there was always people who were willing to play. That was a subtext in here.
Yeah.
For us.
You reckon any of it was real?
Yeah. I reckon some of it was real.
Yeah.
I think the stories we told ourselves weren't accurate. They were just stories just trying to create significance and meaning, some kind of direction. But the essential experiences themselves, I think, were real. As real as any mundane experience.
Imagine the Jason. Something was going on.
With Dr. Rinpoche. from being acquaintances we became friends. And when we happened to travel around together on pilgrimage, I think it must have been in 1956, we saw a lot of each other and the friendship became closer. And the more I saw of Dharata Rinpoche, the more I admired him, and the more I saw in him some very genuine spiritual qualities. So I was looking up to him and respecting him more and more, even though he was still a friend. But a time came when I became, as it were, so aware of those higher spiritual qualities he had, especially the qualities of awareness and compassion, that I felt, well, I can really regard him as a teacher. And at that point I asked him for the Bodhisattva ordination, because I felt that he did exemplify in so many ways the qualities of a real Bodhisattva. So yes, I took the Bodhisattva ordination from him, so I became his disciple. But he continued in many ways to relate to me as a friend. So there was a rather unique sort of combination in my relationship with him of, well, horizontal friendship and vertical friendship, one might say.
I got an enormous amount of benefit from my communication with Bhante. He seemed to understand me, he seemed to have confidence in me, and I found him tremendously inspiring. Above all, I found him somebody I could talk about the kind of concerns that I had, philosophical concerns, Dhammic concerns, and he could sort of lead me much deeper.
Maybe I think in the early days I wanted to be mates with Subhuti, but I think fairly early on it became obvious to me that we probably wouldn't be, because our interests were quite different in lots of ways. I mean, not just the fact that probably he was, you know, slightly more sort of middle class and I was working class. I don't know that ever really came into it, but there was just a sense that we were interested in different things in different kinds of ways, outside of the spiritual life, of course. That was an obviously, you know, sort of shared interest. But yeah, we're not mates. We're not mates. I mean, I love him dearly, and I'm sure he loves me. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And it's lovely to see him, spend time with him, be in study groups with him, listen to him talk, you know, give talks. I love it. But I wouldn't say we were sort of mates in that sense. There's definitely a vertical element that I enjoy and need.
We speak in terms of horizontal and vertical friendship. In horizontal friendship, the two friends are more or less of the same age, the same level of experience in life, and the same level of experience in the Dhamma, if it's a question of friendship in that context. With vertical friendship, those who have greater experience, there are those who have greater experience and those who have less. Perhaps not in all things, but sort of taken overall, generalizing, etc. And I think that applies just as much outside the sphere of the Dhamma as within it. So that even just in life in an ordinary sense, it's very good to have a friendship with somebody who's more experienced than you in life, you might say. In ethical matters, for instance, or just in worldly experience. You can derive a lot from that. I think that element in friendship is much overlooked nowadays.
We should have an all-round experience of friendship, have continuing friendships with people more or less on the same level as ourselves, with those more experienced, especially within the spiritual context, and also with those who are learning perhaps more from us than we are able to learn from them.
What sort of qualities come to mind, Bhante, as regards the young learning from the old? Is it any particular things you can think of?
Well, to begin with, the young have to recognize that they've got something to learn, that they don't know it all. And young people, especially young men, can be very cocky. Yeah? even within spiritual traditions. So the young have to be willing to learn, how to be receptive, recognise that there is something to be learned from the older, more experienced people. Young people, especially young men, as I said, can be very cocky, but they're also very lively, they're fresh. And even if they are a bit sort of wet behind the ears, as we say, there's something quite attractive about that. And if you are, what should I say, a born teacher, if you like teaching, it's a very interesting, a very stimulating experience to teach, to share your experience with young, eager people. And sometimes young people, even though they don't have much knowledge or experience, they may ask quite searching questions, questions which perhaps the mentor hadn't had to face before. So he's obliged to think, to dig deeper into his own experience before he can give some sort of answer to that younger person's question.
We're dabbling in things, and I think for a lot of the time we're bordering in kind of schizophrenia and insanity. Yeah. And that we've kind of ended up all right out of it, but there's one guy who's ended up gone completely insane. There's another guy who's ended up gone completely insane. He had voices in his head telling him he had to kill somebody, and he murdered his father. That's right. That was John. The two of those guys ended up insane. And so although, we can talk about magic and talk about wizards and all the rest of it, it can kind of sound a bit lightweight and a bit fairy, airy-fairy, but it actually ended up getting very, very serious.
It's very real for us.
Very significant.
For many years I didn't see Dr. Rinpoche, so when he died, it didn't make such a very great difference, because even when we were physically separated, when I was in England and he was in India, I thought about him quite a lot. While I was in India, I had received from Dr. Rinpoche a certain initiation. It was the initiation into the sadhana of the White Tara. So I always associated Dr. Rinpoche with the White Tara. So when I say do the sadhana of the White Tara, I think of Dr. Rinpoche. When I think of Dr. Rinpoche, I think of the White Tara. So in a way, he's still as much alive for me as he was when he was still on this earth, but we were physically separated.
Yeah, there was a shared vision to some extent.
Yeah.
At least there was overlap in a kind of vision. And now again, I'm thinking particularly of myself and John, because I don't know how much it was your vision.
No. It didn't bring us closer together.
No.
It drove us apart.
Yeah. I think we became less and less in touch with reality.
Mm.
And the speed at which we were transforming in a downward kind of spiral increased. And no matter how much I pursued it, it wouldn't lead to anything positive. There would be actually no positive change.
We were getting into Buddhism, we were particularly then.
That's right.
And we wanted to learn to meditate.
Yeah. And it was clear that Buddhist vision of the world was far more sophisticated and beautiful than my own. And then a rift started to emerge between myself and John. They both continued along that path.
Yeah.
And ended up crossing a line mentally.
Yeah.
Just went so far that there didn't seem to be a way to come back.
Well, they were very competitive towards you.
Yeah, sure.
John Clark wanted to outdo you.
Sure. That's what it was
he
about.
He wanted to be better than you.
Yeah.
I can remember visiting John and I said, how did you end up here? Where did you go wrong? I said, I was trying to relate to him as an ordinary person. He was like very overweight because he was on a lot of tranquilizers and all the rest of it. And he said, I said, was it like all the acid that you took? And he said, I didn't actually take that much. I lied about how much I took. He said, I don't know how I ended up here. Something like that. And he wanted to get out.
He's gone.
Yeah.
John O'Connell as we knew.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to exist. Maybe, but I don't see it.
I got in touch with Amrita.
Oh yeah? What did he say?
He came back to Dublin talking about you, just raving about you, so we all wanted to come over to meet you.
You came with all the Dublin posse. We were all walking around the garden together. And we had a meeting with, you had a meeting with Sona and me.
Some 12 years ago, Subhuti brought a team together at Padmaloka to help men train for ordination. And it included people like Padmavajra, Sona, Arloka and myself, who were naturally friendly, you could say. We found we could always learn something more about friendship from the different traditions that Sangharakshita had already explored.
We studied with him a text by an Arab author, Al-Ghazali, called The Duties of Brotherhood in Islam. It is a very, very inspiring and noble text.
Atta said, "Seek out your brothers after 3 occasions. If they are sick, visit them. If they are busy, help them. If they have forgotten, remind them."
As a result of that, I made an explicit commitment to friendship with Sona, who is one of my greatest friends now, and probably the one I've kept in closest contact with ever since then. And we explicitly committed ourselves to a friendship, making quite clear what we were undertaking for each other. And we've kept that.
I was trying to work through the list of the omnipresent mental events.
I'm going to do them in bunches.
Our friendship developed at a time when Sona was in Sweden and I was in England. And we decided that we would write to each other regularly, that we'd keep each other in mind daily. And we also made an undertaking to each other that if either of us needed anything from the other, we would immediately ask, and if necessary, just take. And I remember I made Sona a signatory on my bank account and made it clear to him that if he needed, he could take the lot. He never did. But yes, we certainly have helped each other financially and in other ways from time to time. In some ways, the sort of commitments that we made to each other, we've never had to call upon, but the main thing was that we did make them, and we meant it. And I'm sure that if Sona had cleaned out my bank account, I'd have trusted that he'd done it, taking me into consideration and out of great need himself.
There's nothing more praiseworthy in friendship than loyalty, beholding with the same eye the poor and the rich, the strong and the weak, the healthy and the infirm. A truly loyal friend sees nothing in his friend but his heart.
I could say in a word that fidelity is the special flavour of friendship. Because sometimes the fidelity expresses itself in being really honest with your friend and pointing out something that it may be quite difficult or even painful to them, or for them to have pointed out. But anyway, it's your duty as a friend to exhibit that sort of fidelity. You're faithful, as it were, to your friend at his best. You don't let him sort of fall below what he is at his best.
And that was your act of kindness towards him.
Yes. Sometimes people are very easily hurt, and it's not always possible to tell them the whole truth straight away. But at least one leaves the way open to telling them that truth later on.
My observation was that there was a lot that we'd learnt from Bhante in the early days when we were very close to him and doing a lot of seminars with him and having a lot of personal contact with him, which were just not being passed on to people coming into the movement. And these weren't to do with the Eightfold Path and Four Noble Truths and so on and so forth. The sort of skeleton of the Dhamma was being transmitted. Perhaps not as effectively as it should be, but it was being transmitted. But these more deep personal issues were not being transmitted. And so in reorganising the men's ordination process, I made a point of trying to bring these issues out. And I gave several series of talks, but most notably a series of talks on the subject of spiritual friendship. I had no plan. I just gave the first talk, and I remember I wrote notes for the talk, and by the end of an hour and a quarter, I found I got about a third of the way through my notes, and I found that really my notes pretty much lasted me for 8 lectures, and I found that quite spontaneously I'd constructed what I think was a fairly comprehensive and systematic exploration of the theme of spiritual friendship. That seemed to have quite a big influence and did set the tone very much for the ordination team and the ordination process. We had a very, very fine team, all of whom were old friends. I got Sona to come from Sweden and join that team, so I was living with my closest friend. And we put a very, very high premium on friendship and on the quality of the team and communication between team members. And we felt that that was the heart of the whole process, and that we were not so much, teaching people or something like that who came up to our retreats for the ordination process, but we were including them in the field of friendship, and we were trying to excite in them a desire for greater friendship with each other as well as with us. And I think we were pretty successful at the time.
I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the chains holding me. I wish I could say all the things that I should say. Say 'em loud, say 'em clear, for the whole round world to hear. I wish I could share all the love that's in my heart. Remove all the bars that keep us apart. I wish you could know what it means to be me. Then you'd see and agree that every man should be free.
Well, I tell you what I like best about Padmavajra Sutta, and that's the fact that everything is so incredibly ordinary. It's incredibly unspectacular, and it's been like that ever since I first met them.
It was there from the word go with Aloka, though. I just felt incredibly at ease. It's a bit like discovering a brother I didn't know I had. And we just seem to, at some deep level, click, don't we? We always have. Padmavajra, it was directness, I think. I always felt sort of met by you, from the communication exercise.
As often happens on retreat, we had communication exercises. And you have to remember, in those days, my appearance was rather different. I had a beard. I still had glasses, but I had a beard, longish hair. Anyway, I sat down opposite this chap who also had a beard and glasses and long hair. And we just looked at each other and burst into howls of laughter. And we spent the whole of the exercise, and
having a very strong exchange of positive feeling. I suppose I felt like I was being met by a kindred spirit, you know.
But I think the thing is, it is just very sort of like natural. That's the thing, you know. I mean, not a big deal. I mean, if you stand back from it and think about it, you think, you know, well, I think I'm incredibly lucky. You know, I'm incredibly fortunate. But it's, you know, it's almost like it's not like that. You can't actually keep it in focus. You know, because it's just sort of the environment that you exist in.
Certainly myself and John again, we're living in a particular kind of world which was very real for us. Very real. And it wasn't so much for you. So I think just over that period, we just had less and less in common over time. And I'm sure I did things which hurt you. And it ended up that we just weren't talking. And I think that there was just coldness on both sides for a period.
Yeah, I remember feeling resentment towards you about you spending more time with John. I started not to like you because I thought you didn't like me, that you were spending more time with John, which was true.
Yeah.
And I think then when I moved out, it was a bit easier. I think I needed my own space, and then we could pop around to one another. It was a bit more amicable. After about 3 months, we went on a week-long retreat over Christmas, and I particularly remember we walked up the top of a hill one night in the dark. Do you remember that?
Oh, very clear, very clear. I was thinking about it earlier.
Were you? And
yeah.
the moon.
That's
the moon
right.
seemed to be really, really big and low.
Close.
And we were looking at that.
Yeah.
It was a cold January night or something like that.
Yeah, there was puddles and mud.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I remember very, very clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And after that, you built a shrine room in the shed.
That's right.
When we got back.
In Long's place.
Yeah.
There was that sense of just we'd return to friendship.
Yeah.
But in a healthy, positive way. And we were doing positive things, as you say.
Yeah.
And we had a way of doing friendship because we had this new thing. And we were both having these experiences together.
Yeah.
Meditation was new to both of us. And, you know, the world opened up, of course. We were on retreat, so our experience and our universe opened up again.
Yeah.
And it was all like, wow.
Yeah.
Back to the way it used to be.
Yeah.
You know, we'd be like, what is what? With wonder. But we were both had that wonder again.
Yeah.
I think that was significant.
Yeah.
And we were hugging each other, and we were looking at one another, and we're like, we're doing it. We're doing it. We're there. We really are doing it. There was a sense of returning to something.
Excellent Lord, excellent. It is as if someone had set up what had been knocked down, or to point out the way to one who got lost, to bring an oil lamp into a dark place, so that those with eyes could see what was there.
It's still happening. It's got its own momentum. It's not something you think about. And it's just quite, in a way, it's just very, very ordinary. You meet up, you have a good time, and you enjoy being with people. And I think, it has its own momentum. And as far as I'm concerned, it will carry on.
Do you remember that time where the three of us, by chance, went up to make those offerings together in that puja?
Oh, right, yeah.
And how, independently, we were all very moved by it. And the fact was, and it seemed to me like a very eloquent expression of friendship, and yet we weren't looking at each other. We were shoulder to shoulder, worshipping, you know, the shrine. And I think Bhante's very important. And the order, you know, what the order's trying to be, trying to become.
Yeah. Well, I think that was very strong in you know, the original sort of grouping of people that became the ordination team. You know, I mean, one of the things is that you've got a group of people who were completely committed to Bhante and completely committed to the order and loved it, you know, in that kind of way. And I think you know, if you've got that in common, you're laughing, really, aren't you?
Yeah.
You know,
it's actually very easy to form friendships on that basis. I think.
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
If you really kind of relate through that.
Well, you can make connections even with people that you don't like.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, not that I don't like either of you two, but I mean, you can. You know, I mean, I definitely made connections with people because of that, like common bond with people that I wouldn't have touched with a barge pole, like under any other circumstances. You know, not at all.
That's clear.
Yeah, no, extraordinary. Weird business.
Mysterious.
It's obviously possible that friendship could develop and flower very beautifully and deeply, completely spontaneously. No one never even thinks, oh, he's my friend, I must develop my friendship with him, I must work at it, or something like that. That is at least conceivable, and perhaps for some people it is like that. But I think for most people there's always a bit of a struggle, because friendship contains an element of idealism, certainly when we can begin to talk of it as spiritual friendship. And ideals are always at odds with other drives and forces within one. So there is perhaps a question, almost inevitably for most people, of thinking about their friendships and, in Johnson's famous phrase, keeping their friendships in good repair, so that friendship is something to be, in a sense, worked at. Not that it's mere work, because a vital part of friendship is delighting in each other. But yes, you do need to work to keep your friendship alive and to honour your friend and not to betray your friend to your own baser drives and motives, to forgive your friend when your friend hurts you, as he inevitably will, and as you will inevitably hurt him, and so on. So I think that it's not possible, practically speaking, for most people to think of friendship without thinking of work and of conscious evolution of friendship.
I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the chains holding me. I wish I could say all the things that I should say. Say them loud, say them clear, for the whole round world to hear. I wish I could share all the love that's in my heart. Remove all the bars that keep us apart. I wish you could know what it means to be me. Then you'd see and agree that every man should be free. I wish I could give all I'm longing to give. I wish I could live like I'm longing to live. I wish I could do all the things that I can do, though I'm way overdue. I'd be starting anew. Well, I wish I could be like a bird in the sky. How sweet it would be if by my heart I could fly. I'd soar to the sun and look down at the sea. Then I'd sing, 'cause I know, yeah. Not sing, 'cause I know, yeah. Then I'd sing, 'cause I know how it feels.